They told me Eleanor Finch was senile. They said she talked to the shadows. But looking at this painting, this Alistair Croft masterpiece, I realized she wasn't crazy. She was just a gatekeeper. I didn't just steal a $10 million canvas tonight. I stole her husband's soul, and as the house begins to scream, I'm starting to think the painting is looking back at me.
The curation. Max Miller didn't consider himself a thief. He was a liquidator of forgotten assets. He targeted the lonely, the elderly, and the decaying. His latest mark, Eleanor Finch, lived in a Victorian mansion that smelled of lavender and slow-moving time. For months, Max played the part of the doting estate consultant, eyeing the prize above her mantel, waiting, study in patience. By the reclusive Alistair Croft, the painting was haunting. A single man sat on a stone bench in a twilight garden. Up close, the oils were built so thick they looked like geological layers, violent, heavy, and sculptural. From a distance, it was a masterpiece of crushing loneliness. "It's my Edward," Eleanor would whisper, her gnarled fingers clutching a tea service. Alistair captured his soul before he passed. He promised to wait for me right there, on that bench. Max would smile, his eyes calculating the auction value. "It's not safe here, Eleanor. A piece like this belongs in a vault." "It belongs where I can see him," she'd snap, her voice turning to flint. "And it will never leave this house while I still draw breath." Max took that as a challenge. When he heard Eleanor had suffered a stroke and was rushed to the hospital, he didn't send flowers. He grabbed his kit. Under the cover of a rain-slicked Tuesday night, he slipped through a faulty pantry window. The house was unnervingly silent. He reached the parlor, the painting shimmering like a dark pool in the gloom. He worked quickly, his blade humming as it freed the canvas from its heavy gilded frame. But as he rolled the silk-wrapped masterpiece, a cold draft hit the back of his neck. He turned. Eleanor wasn't at the hospital. She was sitting in her favorite wingback chair, draped in a shawl. Her eyes were fixed on the empty frame. She was motionless. When Max reached out to check for a pulse, her skin felt like parchment-covered ice. She was dead. She had died watching him strip her life's meaning from the wall. As he scrambled out the window, a sickening snap, like a dry branch breaking, echoed from the parlor. Max didn't look back. The reckoning. Back in his sterile, glass-walled penthouse, Max mounted the canvas on a custom easel. He poured a scotch, waiting for the adrenaline to fade, but the air in his apartment felt heavy. The climate control was set to 22 degrees Celsius, yet he could see his breath misting in the air. By the third night, the lavender scent was everywhere. It wasn't the sweet smell of flowers. It was the cloying, suffocating odor of a funeral parlor. He began to hear things, the scratching of a needle on an old gramophone, playing a waltz that ended abruptly with a screech of metal. Then, the painting began to change. At first, Max thought it was a trick of the light, but by the fourth morning, there was no denying it. The man on the stone bench was closer. The garden background was being pushed back, the thick, sculptural brushstrokes reconfiguring themselves. The figure's head, previously bowed in profile, was now turned slightly toward the front of the canvas. The eyes were two pits of wet, black oil that seemed to track Max across the room. "Stress?" Max hissed, gripping a palette knife. "It's just a chemical reaction. The paint is settling." But the paint wasn't settling. It was hunting. That evening, Max walked into the study to find the man on the bench now at the very edge of the foreground. The figure's hand, previously resting in its lap, was now gripped onto the painted frame, the knuckles rendered in such violent, protruding detail they looked like real bone under a layer of gray sludge. Out of the corner of his eye, Max saw her. Eleanor. She stood in the doorway of his study, her translucent skin shimmering with the dust of her old house. She didn't speak. She simply pointed at the canvas. Driven to a breaking point by the cold and the smell of death, Max lunged. "I'll burn you first." He raised the palette knife to shred the masterpiece. His arm stopped midair. It felt as if he had plunged it into a vat of setting concrete. An invisible, freezing force held him fast. Slowly, with a sound like wet leather tearing, the painted arm of the figure delaminate from the canvas. The heavy, three-dimensional oil reached out into the physical world. A gray, textured hand clamped around Max's wrist. The grip was absolute. Max screamed as he was jerked forward. His face slammed against the canvas, but instead of hitting a flat surface, he sank. The paint felt like cold, liquefied meat. It filled his mouth with the taste of turpentine and old earth. He clawed at the easel, but the figure in the painting, the Edward Eleanor had loved, opened its jaw. It wasn't a mouth. It was a dark abyss of unpainted void. The claw gave a final, brutal tug. Max's body was folded into the canvas, his bones snapping as he was compressed into a two-dimensional nightmare. The next morning, the sun rose over the city. A high-end art broker arrived at the penthouse for the scheduled viewing. He found the door unlocked, the apartment freezing, and the air smelling faintly of lavender. In the study, the broker found the painting. He gasped at its brilliance. The detail, "It's evolved," he whispered. Beside the man on the stone bench, a second figure had appeared. It was a man in a tailored suit, his face frozen in a silent, painted shriek. He was rendered in frantic, messy strokes of indigo and charcoal, his hands clutching at a stone bench that would never let him go.
At the bottom of the frame, a fresh splatter of crimson glistened. The broker touched it, expecting wet oil, pulled his hand back, confused. The paint was warm, and it wouldn't wash off.